If you are a dental hygiene student struggling with head and neck anatomy, this video is for you. Today we are continuing on part 5, terminal branches of the external carotid artery. This is the biggest section because that maxillary artery has a lot going on. There are 2 terminal branches, superficial temporal artery and the maxillary artery. Superficial temporal artery, mouthful, arises within the parotid gland and travels upward toward the temporal region. It's that one you see pulsing on cartoon characters when they're stressed. So the superficial temporal artery has several branches. Transverse facial artery supplies the parotid gland. Middle temporal artery supplies the temporalis muscle. Frontal branch supplies the frontal region. And parietal branch supplies the parietal region. Super simple. The only one you'll have to know is the transverse facial artery helps supply the parotid gland. Everything else basically matches to name. Alright, now the maxillary artery. Hang tight. This is the largest terminal branch and the most relevant in dentistry. It has 3 parts, mandibular, pterygoid, and pterygoid palatine. Part 1, mandibular part. We have the middle meningeal artery. This supplies the meninges of the brain, and it enters the cranium via the foramen spinosum. We have the IA, inferior alveolar artery. This branches into the mylohyoid artery, mental artery, and incisive artery. Mylohyoid artery arises from the IA before the main artery enters the mandibular canal. It travels with the mylohyoid nerve in that mylohyoid groove, which is on the medial surface of the mandible. This supplies the floor of the mouth and the mylohyoid muscle. Okay, so the IA has dental and alveolar branches. This is when it's in that mandibular canal. The dental branches, these supply the pulp of the mandibular posterior teeth through the apical foramen. If you remember in oral biology when we learned about pulp formation. Anyways, dental branches, teeth. Alveolar branches supply the buccal periodontium and gingiva of the mandibular posterior teeth. Alveolar is the mucosa part. No teeth involved, just the tissue. That's going to be important when it comes to local anesthetics, which we'll learn about the nerves and stuff, but remember it. Okay, the mental artery exits by way of mental foramen. It supplies the chin, mental. The incisive artery is just alongside that mental, but it remains within the mandibular canal. It divides into dental and alveolar branches. Dental branch supplies the teeth from the pulp, the mandibular anterior teeth, canine to canine. Alveolar branches supply the tissue, labial periodontium and gingiva of the mandibular anterior teeth. Dental branch is teeth, alveolar is bone and tissue. Okay, part 2, pterygoid part. This helps supply the muscle of mastication. These have 4 branches, deep temporal arteries, temporal, anterior, and posterior. Pterygoid arteries supply the lateral and medial pterygoid muscles. Masseteric artery supplies the masseter muscle. Buccal artery supplies the buccinator muscle. There again, basically by the name. Pterygoid part's easy. One thing I do need to add here, the buccinator is not a muscle of mastication. It is a facial expression muscle. So don't get that confused, please. Okay, part 3, pterygoid palatine. Okay, so as the maxillary artery leaves the infratemporal fossa, it enters the pterygoid palatine fossa, and it gives rise to the PSA, which is the posterior superior alveolar artery that enters on the foramina of the maxillary tuberosity, and this supplies the pulp and the buccal tissue of the maxillary posterior teeth. It also supplies the maxillary sinus membrane. Another key branch of the pterygoid palatine part is the infraorbital artery. It enters the orbit through the inferior orbital fissure and provides to the orbital branches, but it gives rise to the ASA, anterior superior alveolar artery. So the ASA supplies the maxillary anterior teeth, canine to canine. And remember, that breaks up into dental versus alveolar. Dental is going to be the pulp. Alveolar is going to be the tissue. We also have the MSA, the middle superior alveolar artery, often present but not always. This supplies the maxillary premolars and the mesiobuccal cusp of the maxillary first molar. Okay, and then really quickly, a couple additional branches. The descending palatine artery travels to the palate through the pterygoid palatine canal and branches the greater palatine artery and the lesser palatine artery, basically by the little foraminas on the palate. The GP, greater palatine, supplies the hard palate and palatal periodontium of the maxillary posterior teeth. It supplies the soft palate. So the descending palatine artery supplies the hard and soft palate. Last one, the sphenopalatine artery. This is where the maxillary artery is ending by becoming the sphenopalatine artery. It supplies the nasal cavity, giving rise to the NP, nasopalatine branch. It supplies the anterior palate, canine to canine. Oh my goodness, guys, we made it. That was a lot to digest, wasn't it? Well, I hope this helped. Have fun studying, and I'll see you next time. Bye!